So when I was telling people I was going to give a TED Talk about imposter syndrome, I would usually receive one of two reactions. The first was, that's good. I suffer from imposter syndrome. And the second was, yeah, I actually have no idea what that is. So before we spend the next 15 minutes together talking about how to succeed in spite of imposter syndrome, let's level set with what imposter syndrome is. Now, the term imposter syndrome was first coined by two American psychologists in the late 70s. And in general, it's a feeling that you're not good enough or that you don't belong, when in fact, you are good enough and you do belong. Participants in the study were found to have generalized anxiety, depression, a lack of self-confidence, and a general frustration with their inability to meet their own self-imposed standards of achievement. 70% of you will at some time suffer from imposter syndrome. So do you have it? Have you ever walked into a meeting and thought, I have no business being here? Have you ever hesitated to raise your hand thinking someone's gonna think that's dumb? Ever felt like a little bit of a fraud? When something goes well for you, do you say it's because of good luck, being in the right place at the right time? Have you ever found yourself on a stage standing on a big red dot, wondering what you were doing with all of these fantastic people? That one might be specific to just me. Now, I serve as General Counsel and Chief Risk Officer for one of South Dakota's largest family-owned banks. This year, I had the distinct privilege of serving as chair of the South Dakota Bankers Association. I serve as vice chair of the Helpline Center. I'm one of 7 bankers in the country that serve on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Community Bank Advisory Council. In February of this year, I was named one of top 50 corporate counsels in the world by Oncon. And thank you. But to be clear, I don't share this with you because I think I'm awesome, or because if our time together goes poorly, you'll be like, well, kind of a mess on stage, but looked good on paper. I share this with you because despite any professional success I might have, I still feel like an imposter. There are still meetings I walk into and I think I have no business being there. And there are still times when I hesitate to raise my hand. And I'm doing this TED Talk and being as honest with you as possible because I don't think we talk about it enough. And it's worth looking back to see if we always felt this way. And so I'm going to introduce you to 10-year-old Kristina. So in my hometown of Miller, South Dakota, you start band in 5th grade. So in 4th grade, you go to the band room and you try all the instruments, and then the idea is you bring your parents back the next day and you pick the instrument. And I was going to play the trumpet. My grandma played the cornet, and I can still picture it in its velvet-lined box. I was gonna play the trumpet. And I walked to the band room that day and I tried the trumpet, but it didn't take me very long, still gonna play the trumpet. So I had the rest of the class time to spend, and I thought, well, I'm gonna walk back to the back of the room, past all the other instruments, past the music stands, and I'm gonna try drums. And as I'm walking back there, a boy stops and he says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm gonna try drums. And he looks at me and he goes, girls don't play drums. Well, in that moment, despite being told I didn't deserve a seat at the table and I wasn't good enough, I was like, I think I'm gonna play drums. And not only am I gonna play drums, but I'm gonna be the best possible drummer I can be. And fast forward, I went to SDSU on a partial music scholarship, so things worked out for me. But I like to fast forward to kind of a couple years later to middle-aged Kristina. I'd been in the South Dakota Bankers Association and I'd served on the trust committee and the credit card committee. And I finally had the opportunity to serve on the legislative committee. I'm a lawyer and a banker, so legislative committee is kind of like peak bank geek moment for me. I loved the committee, I loved the work that they did, and I loved the people that served on that committee. And I got a call one day and they said, Kristina, we would love for you to chair that committee. And I was ecstatic. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to chair that committee. But do you know what the first words out of my mouth were? Are you sure? And I heard those words coming out of my mouth, and I stopped and I said, but I'll do it. the person who asked me to chair that committee is a lovely human being. He did not look around the room and be like, I wonder who we could make as uncomfortable as possible. I wonder who would do the worst possible job chairing this committee. He asked me because he thought I could do it. So why was I so hesitant to say yes? Now, from 10-year-old Kristina, sorry, that was loud, to middle-aged Kristina, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of research about what causes imposter syndrome. And I want to be clear about something. I had a great childhood. I had amazing parents. I had grandparents who came to every single basketball game. And I didn't play basketball. I was playing drums in the pep band. I work for an incredibly supportive employer. I have good friends. So why I suffer from imposter syndrome is frankly probably another TED Talk. But what we're gonna focus on today is we're not gonna admire the problem, we're gonna talk about how to fix it. And my first tip to you all is I've come to realize that I am not perfect, and that is okay. If I were to ask everyone, what is your greatest weakness? I bet I would get a resounding round of choruses as, I'm a perfectionist, I'm too hard on myself. And I get it, right? I mean, perfectionism, it's so embodied in our culture today. We always look for who has the best of something, who wins that tournament. We filter our social media profiles. We don't even pick restaurants anymore without looking up their Yelp reviews. And this is a part of my TED Talk where I could say really inspirational things like, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And I do believe that to be true. And I wish I could stand here before you today and say, I've made mistakes and I haven't been perfect, but I don't think about it anymore. But that would be a lie. I think about my mistakes and I think about when things don't go well a lot, often at 2 a.m. So what I've come to do is learn the art of thoughtful reflection. When I do something, I ask myself a couple of questions. Did you practice? Were you as prepared as you could have been? Did you try your hardest? Was there anything you could have done differently? And if I have practiced and I've tried my hardest and there's nothing I could do differently, then I need to channel my inner Elsa and I need to let it go. But I'm standing here before you now and I'm gonna walk backstage. It's gonna be kind of tough. I mean, I'm really hoping I'm not gonna trip and fall, but I did just have a microphone incident a little bit ago, so I'll replay that later. So that's good. But I prepared a lot. If you've been driving in Sioux Falls lately in a pickup line or down somewhere, there's a good chance you saw me doing my TED Talk in the car. I am trying my best, and I honestly don't know what I could have done differently. I'm gonna strive for excellence, not for perfection. But speaking of preparation, when you have imposter syndrome, one of two things usually happens. Either you're so overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation in front of you that you just can't get started, or you just can't stop. You can't stop practicing, you can't stop thinking about it, and I happen to fall in the latter category. So what I have to do is I have to set myself tangible goals. Kristina, you will review this contract 3 times. You will practice your TED Talk 5 times, and then I do a visual exercise where I close my eyes, I envision myself putting my contract into the box, I tie a bow on it, and present it like the gift that it really is. Now, my second tip for overcoming imposter syndrome actually comes from my 15-year-old daughter. She is an amazing human being. It's stronger in ways that I can't even comprehend. And she also happens to suffer from pretty extreme anxiety. And over the years, as we've worked to help her succeed in spite of her anxiety, she's learned that her anxiety isn't who she is. Rather, her anxiety is just a voice in her head. And it's a voice telling her, you're not good enough, you're probably gonna fail, probably shouldn't even try. And she's named her voice Gordon. She's named her voice Gordon after a rather popular internet TV chef celebrity who is loud, who doesn't pick his words, and just says what's ever on his mind. So when she's having a moment and her anxiety is telling her, you're not good enough, you shouldn't try, she says, "Sit down, Gordon. I am enough." And what a remarkably powerful tool if you feel like an imposter, because that's not who you are. You are enough. So when I am sitting in meetings and I'm feeling like a little bit of an imposter, I walk into a room and I think, I got no business being here. I just do the same thing and say, "Sit down, Gordon. I am enough." Now, let's say you've been listening to me for a while and you're like, "Well, that's great, but I've never felt like an imposter." To which I say, and I do mean this genuinely, good for you. But I also think then you've got a little bit of an obligation to help the rest, the 70% of us who do feel like an imposter. And the best way for you to do that is to be a deliberate encourager. There was a point in my career where I was at a business meeting, and the chairman running that meeting that day asked me to stand up. And as he asked me to stand up, he said, "I'd like to introduce Kristina Schaefer. She's an emerging leader in our industry, and I think we're gonna see a lot of good things out of her someday." That moment was over a decade ago. To this day, I can tell you what I was wearing. I can tell you who else was sitting at the table. I can tell you what was on my plate, and I can tell you what the weather looked like outside. Because in that moment, that public recognition, that's how much that meant to me. Now, we're not all gonna have the opportunity to stand on a stage and tell people we think they're awesome. But when you see someone do something good, drop them a note. The chairman of the organization I work for, every time he sees something cool, he drops a note. And I have kept every single one of them. Better yet, drop their boss a note. If you see an opportunity for someone and you think they'd be fantastic for it, ask them when, not if, but when they're gonna apply for this new opportunity. Be that positive voice in their head until they can tell their Gordon to sit down. And you might be thinking, well, that's good, but I don't know how do you know someone has imposter syndrome? You hear it in their words. You hear it because when they go to talk to you and they have an idea, they'll say something like, "This might be a dumb idea," or "I know I'm new here." Or you'll hear them further qualify their responses because they'll say something like, "I actually have an idea," or "I just want to say," because clearly they couldn't have a good idea. When you hear them use those words, you need to stop them in their tracks. And you need to say, "I know you're new, but that's what's great. We love new ideas." When they say, "That might be a silly idea," you say, "That was a great idea. We appreciate your perspective." And most importantly, when they try to tell you that their success, or you give them a compliment and they say, "Thanks, just my lucky day," you stop them. And remember, they're a perfectionist. So tell them how much you noticed their hard work and how hard they tried. Be that voice until they can tell Gordon to sit down. Now, our time together is almost coming to a close tonight, and I did a lot of research on how to successfully end a TED Talk. And so if you Google how to end a talk like this, you'll get a lot of advice, like, you should tell a story so the audience has an emotional connection to you. You should also try to wrap up like everything you want to say and leave the audience with like one main point. So no pressure. And I was trying to think, like, is there a story as a parent I could share? Is there another story from work I could share, from my friends? And then I started to worry, like, I've got a lot of people in the audience that I know tonight. I'm thinking, they're probably like, "Well, Kristina, I'm not sure you have imposter syndrome. I think you actually might be faking it." The good news is, we're almost done. I haven't tripped, but I'm worried. I'm worried that some of you are gonna be like, "I don't know that I got anything out of that." I'm worried maybe I talked too fast. I think I made it through all my slides. So I'm just gonna take a page from my own playbook. I'm gonna close my eyes, put this TED Talk in a box and say, "Sit down, Gordon. I am enough." Thank you.